Well, hello everyone. Thanks for coming to this panel discussion on privacy, building with privacy. We've got a pretty amazing group of people here to share their experiences and their convictions about privacy and what we can do. Just to kind of like open the subject a little bit, some of the reasons why we believe privacy is important. One is to improve the economic fairness of entities transacting. So as we know, asymmetric information can provide one actor with more advantage over another. So that's one reason. Another one is the ability to preserve the fungibility of tokens, right? So if we mark tokens on a public chain as, say, stolen or something, those tokens will eventually be censored and have less value than other tokens. Censorship resistance, and of course, preventing nefarious actors such as governments and dictators from eroding the rights of individuals. So today's panel discussion, I'd like to introduce the panelists here really quickly. So Sajida is someone I've known for some time. She's been working on privacy-preserving technologies for some time. She's a blockchain architect working on social impact projects, most recently one called Hellhound, right? Henry de Valence, yeah, from Penumbra Labs. He's formerly working with the Zcash Foundation and currently building DeFi primitives with privacy built in. And we have Nico Bacca over here, someone I've known for some time as well. I call him the Steve Wozniak of crypto. As you know, he's credited with building the Ledger device. And finally, Christoph Goes, author of the IPC protocol spec, and currently working with Anoma for building privacy primitives on the chain. So, and myself, I'm Richard Ceatano, co-founder of Akord, and we're building storage primitives on the Arweave blockchain. So we'd like to get into the discussion by just introducing several themes, and then we're going to give the panelists some time to discuss and share their convictions around those themes. So the first theme is, let's just review the space of privacy. What are we currently working on? What's really interesting? Where are your convictions? Where would you like to see things go? Maybe start with Henry.
Hi. Maybe I'll start just with what I'm currently working on, which is Penumbra. It's an attempt to build a ZK DEX, and specifically trying to make it so that it's possible to do private trading or market making. It's kind of interesting, though. I didn't get into that because of I have this deep and long-standing passion for improving market structure or something, right? I got into it because I had spent years trying to build private infrastructure, and had this feeling of it's there's this Venn diagram between projects that people use and projects that are private, and it's actually just two circles that barely touch, right? And although, I'm motivated by, I don't want to live in kind of a total surveillance panopticon. I want there to be infrastructure for people to coordinate with each other privately. That in itself, isn't actually enough to build a useful product, right? And one of the lessons from encrypted messaging and privacy in that context is that if you start out by trying to build this sort of hyper private, super secret thing, but it's not actually usable, then you're just sort of identifying all the people who use it as the weirdos who are using their weirdo privacy tool for their own weirdo activities, and it's not just this is this default thing that everybody uses, right? So the reason that we're interested in trying to build a private trading system fundamentally is here's an opportunity to kind of change the game a little bit and go from just this is a privacy product that's kind of worse, but it's private, so you should want to use it, to here's a product that's actually better at the thing that it sets out to do because it allows people to control disclosure of their information, right? And that's why I think trading is a really interesting use case for privacy, because there's some very quantifiable and like near-term financial value to privacy, rather than just being this kind of abstract, unquantifiable, maybe there's a tail risk, 10 years from now we'll have this like dystopian something, right? It's much more immediate and near term.
Do you think DeFi will eventually all be shielded or in private?
No. I think that there's going to always be a mix. And I think one of the big problems that is kind of under addressed is there's all this work of like, okay, how do we make this thing private? How do we sort of use more and more cryptography to make everything like perfectly private? But if you imagine like a DEX, for instance, where every single part of that is totally secret, it's actually not a useful product. Nobody wants to use a DEX where like the prices are all secret. People need to know what the sort of aggregate state of the market is. And so I think that the really interesting dynamic that we'll see play out is like how do you start like managing the interplay between we want to have privacy for individual actions, individual users, but we want to have transparency and accountability for all of these aggregates. Like one of the really awesome things about DeFi is that because everything is totally transparent and on-chain, you don't have this like if there's like a liquidation, it just like happens automatically. And you can have a very, very robust financial infrastructure because all of the details are kind of real-time auditable for everyone. And you want to keep that while still allowing people to, do things that require private coordination.
Sajida, would you like to share a little bit about your work and some of the technologies that you have been implementing and,
Sure.
and some of the outcomes of those experiments?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I really like what you said about basically normalizing privacy and not making it something that like only niche people use day to day. Actually, something that has been guiding my work for many years is how do you reconcile transparency, which is one of the interesting characteristics of blockchain, with privacy, which is something that we need for users to take over, to take control over their data and gain more agency. So how do you do that? Currently, the way that the web was built was not by taking into account at its core principle the privacy of the users. Actually, it's quite the opposite even. It's like, can we leverage user data to make more money? And so when you do that, you exclude the user from the value chain. And so really the problems become, how do you put back the user in the value chain? And so we have an opportunity with blockchain and crypto to do that. So are we going to basically take that opportunity and build the Web3 where users have ownership over their data, their identity? Or are we going to make the same mistakes again, but with more fancy tech? So most of the project that I've been working on follows those principles. I can talk about Hellhound, and maybe in terms of use cases, I will talk about Kinner later. But Hellhound, the idea is to create a blind computation platform. So really a distributed network of nodes, Hellhound nodes, that are going to run heavy computation off-chain and only store proof, mathematical proof on-chain, so that those calculations can be verified. And so by doing that, you can basically send inputs that are going to be encrypted and still get a result. And that's a game changer in the way that DApp and just regular application work today. So basically what you want is for the user to send over their data and know that they're not paying a double cost, which is, maybe the price of the service, but also the fact that now the data that they share, they don't have control over it. It's the service provider that has it. And it doesn't make any sense. When you use blind computation technology, you still can leverage business opportunity, you still can do work, and you're not limited by privacy. And I think that's a common misconception. If we do more privacy, maybe it's great for the users, but at the same time, in terms of business, we are restricted. We cannot share, we cannot develop, etc. And it's quite the opposite. Just think about a world where different actors that can be competitors are not scared to share business data with each other or customer information with each other because it's all encrypted and no one is going to leverage that for a competitive edge. But at the same time, by breaking the silos, they're creating a new service that individually they will never have been able to propose to their customer, but by working together, now they can. And so let's think about privacy as a way to foster innovation rather than limiting it.
Well, it seems like from just the both of you, we're starting to see how privacy applies very much so to the individual, but from the collective perspective, we may want to keep some of this data, be able to query it, be able to use it, and show indicators of where markets are going, things like that. So it's a very interesting topic to unbundle. So kind of like moving through the themes here, I just kind of want to give everyone a chance and then kind of like dig into some more of the subjects here. So coming to the subject of Cosmos and privacy and dealing with IBC and those kinds of transactions, how do you see privacy rolling out, being integrated, developing in the Cosmos ecosystem, and where do you find interesting projects and opportunities?
Right. Well, I first want to second Henry's point that what we want is not like privacy everywhere in all cases. It is control over where information goes and when. I think the line here, though, is like somewhat subtle, and at least, you know, so a few times this week I had conversations with people who were really excited about using zero-knowledge proofs for like privacy-preserving ads. And it's cool that they're using zero-knowledge proofs, but I'm just not excited about ads. Like, making them more privacy-preserving is not, you know, you're fixing the wrong problem, man. That said, in our case, I work on Anoma, which is a sort of protocol stack for private counterparty discovery and settlement. And especially in the counterparty discovery phase, if you need to discover people, say, with whom you might want to trade, you have to reveal something, unless you're like going to search over all of the spaces of possible people, which is not a tractable problem, right? So you have to reveal a little bit about what it is you have and what it is that you want. And with that information, doesn't matter which cryptography you're using, right? But with that information, some kind of gossip network, in our case, can help you potentially find a counterparty with which you could agree on details and then settle. So here's a case where like users want to reveal information because revealing information allows this kind of system architecture to help them find someone with who they might want to coordinate. But at the same time, you know, all of this information flowing across the network, right? If it's just like completely public, these commitments to what people might want to buy or sell, that's like a great source of data for someone wanting to, you know, do some advertising, right? So I think even in these cases, there's this like subtle balance where you want to reveal as much information as is necessary, but not more than is necessary, and you want to even have some like idea of who probably might be your counterparty, so you can find them and only talk to them, or only talk to people who are probably them, instead of just broadcasting it to everybody.
Would you say that consent is a major like feature of this?
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that eventually we can make privacy so default that no one even bothers to have panels about it. I mean, if we play if you play incomplete information games, which are most games, right? Like Battleship or Dota or Settlers of Catan or poker, no one like has discussions about the concept of privacy in poker because it's so innate to the game that you're playing, and everyone just understands by default. Like, you have your cards, you know, you show them at sometimes, you hold them sometimes, only show the back, right? It doesn't require a like conceptual understanding of privacy as this component of this system. It's just an intrinsic part of, you know, what it is that you're doing in the first place. And I think similarly we grasp this in like conversation when you talk to people. You know, you don't say exactly the same thing to exactly, you know, to everyone, and that can sometimes become a problem. But also, it's like a necessary substrate for coordination. I think if you had to like, it's so easy to take stuff out of context that, as we see with lots of DAOs nowadays, if you broadcast every single aspect of your decision-making and discussions to the world, it's just really easy for someone to misrepresent that. So we want this like tricky middle ground of some privacy by default, some verifiability, some aggregates, price data, some information about how to structure the market. But the line there is not, you know, it's not necessarily one which can be derived from some sort of technical first principles. I think it's also one that's negotiated by culture and society over time.
And coming back to Cosmos, what areas do you see most exciting developments happening in terms of privacy?
I'm very excited that both Penumbra and Nemana and Anoma are working on shielded pools on Cosmos. I hope that everyone will adopt shielded pools on Cosmos. Like, the technology is there, it's free, please go. The next step after that is to, okay, well, if we have many separate shielded pools, then they're like competing with each other, and you have to choose one privacy set or another privacy set, and that's a bit sad, because if you know, there's this like, if you choose this privacy set, then that privacy set gets less privacy. So I hope that we can come up with some good like private bridging technology for these privacy sets to interoperate. The other thing, just like as a kind of aside, many applications and where you might want privacy do not like require a blockchain at all. And my guess, and you probably know more here, but my guess is like why don't these things happen is mostly that like take Signal, right? Signal, does not kind of requires like a server, but doesn't require global ordering and everything, at least in not exactly the same way. And Signal is like a great private application that people in the real world who do not understand double ratchet can use relatively safely, right? Like to me, that's a great example of success. And at the same time, Signal was built by the best cryptographers and user experience architects roughly in the world, like for this particular problem. And only they could build it. So it's not very accessible. And one hope of mine is that all of this like capital, thanks to sort of mostly the financial use cases in the blockchain technology space, much of which is getting redirected towards like privacy and privacy implementation and cryptography implementation research, will also have this like side public externality of producing much better languages and compiler architectures and proof systems and just sufficiently safe implementations of cryptography for privacy that expose sufficiently like high-level APIs, programming APIs, that developers who do not understand like elliptic curve cryptography can use them to make applications that are private for people safely. Because I think that would be a big win in terms of like how much of the application space, because plenty of people can build applications and can even reason about like data flow if they have a good language to do that, and reason about what data is private, what data is not private, but they probably cannot figure out like a cycle of elliptic curves for recursive ZK snarks, right? So if we can abstract that as sort of an industry to developers in a way that's safe to use and safe for users of those applications, I think that would be a big win.
There are several like ZK toolkits and stuff, or SDKs that are being rolled out, which could be very interesting in this respect. Yeah. So for Nico, with your experiences building wallets for crypto in Web3 space, it seems to put you, Ledger, in an interesting space between like all of the crypto people and then governments. How do you see government regulation and awareness, specifically around like tax evasion and anti-money laundering, things like that? But how do you see it kind of like developing right now? Where do you kind of see things going? Where are there like a lot of sticky areas to sort out in this topic?
Yeah, so sorry. So I would say that we are in an interesting position because we are trying to embed a lot of people into crypto, and well, I like privacy a lot. I mean, for all the reasons that have been expressed before in the panel, and we are trying to make it easy to use for people, and at the same time, I mean, compliant with what the governments, as you said, are trying to push. So we are not going to, for example, ourselves to be pushing for privacy technology directly integrated in Ledger Live, because that's something that all the users are connected to. But since we are providing a hardware device which is used to securely sign transactions, we want it to be compliant with all those protocols. And so the way we do this is that while we are not promoting directly, I would say, privacy solutions that can be used to conceal funds and, for example, mixers and that kind of technology, we are an open platform, and we want people to be able to build whatever they want on the device. So now, the problem we have with this is that as a hardware device, as a hardware wallet, we want to protect people's private key, and we want to make sure that they are not vulnerable to malware. We see that often privacy can come in the middle and can actually make the device job more complex when we do that, because when we are dealing with a privacy protocol, we still have to sign the transaction on device, and of course then the protocol will make it hard for the user to read what is included in the transaction, because that's the way the protocol is working. So we have to rework those protocols usually to make it easier, I mean, or at least split the protocol between the privacy and the security part to make it possible for a hardware device with limited resources to display exactly what's happening and to make it easy to use for people. And so we spend time doing this for simple privacy protocols. So today we did that with Monero, we did that with Liquid. We could adapt it for Zcash as well, because that's something that's just a little bit more complex. My position on this is that we don't want to put the spotlight, I would say, on us, on our users, but we want to support the cryptographic toolkits that can make it easy for people to implement whatever protocol they want. And another thing that I find very interesting, so as you said, is that that today we have a lot of capital deployed in blockchains, so this has allowed us to make a lot of advances in cryptography. I would say that even if all the blockchain space crashes to zero tomorrow, we will still have all the cryptography. One funny thing I heard, in a conference is that, some researcher was saying that the problem they had before blockchain was a thing is that 2 years after their PhD, nobody would care about what they wrote. And the problem they have after blockchain is that 6 months, like 3 months maybe after publishing a draft, there will be already an altcoin implemented supporting the protocol. So yeah, I think that's a good problem to have. We make a lot of advances in cryptography, especially with the ZK proof and so on. Have been are able to solve different problems. We can scale, we can solve scalability and privacy at the same time, which is great. And we will be able to use those technologies to push for changes in the real world, I would say. And a good example, if we come back to government about that, is KYC. So know your customer. A lot of people are trying to push for more KYC regulation in the crypto space. And if we are pushed for KYC regulation, we have several ways to tackle the problem. On one end of the spectrum, we have the current solution where everybody is sending their private data to all actors, and you create honeypots of data. You create, a lot of problems when you are sending your documents to a lot of exchanges when you want to interact with centralized actors. You don't know who is going to verify your document, where they are going to go. So that's one end of the spectrum, which is not the one we want. And another one is to say, okay, I'm going to make my KYC with one actor, and then I'm going to create zero knowledge proof of some parts which are interesting for the exchanges, and just send this. So we can do this because we have advanced the cryptography stack enough in the blockchain space to be able to support this. But after we have this, the interesting part is that we can push it back to the financial institutions, where if you look at what happens with your bank today, the KYC is about as bad as it is in crypto. It's even worse. So after we succeed, I think it will be a great way to push it back and to say, okay, so here is how we do KYC in the crypto space. You can do the same for your regular bank, for your neobanks and so on. And so we will be improving the state of privacy of everybody, I would say, with the advances we have made in the crypto space.
So just recently, I think the European Union was announcing some new possible regulations coming down where they define the difference between a hosted and an unhosted wallet. How do you see that factoring into your work at Ledger?
Yeah, so first I would say...
What kind of trouble do you think may come from this?
I'm trying to push only to use the term wallet, because I don't think an unhosted wallet is I don't think a hosted wallet is a wallet, so that's... but yeah, okay, they decided to call that unhosted wallet. For us, it's not in the end really an issue, because peer-to-peer transactions are not regulated. I would say it's an issue for the exchanges who want to interact with those devices, and that's where the regulation are trying to push more requirements regarding collecting information when they are dealing with those wallets, and that's a great way for us to push for those kind of new KYCs. So we are trying. If we need to have KYC, we are going to push for less intrusive KYC. So that's definitely where we are going to. So today we have been testing, very simple decentralized identity solutions where we can have those kind of proofs as I was talking about. And you have several companies in the space, already working on this. So I think one of the most interesting one, at least technically speaking, from my understanding, are Polygon ID and Sysmo, so who are basically working on the same frameworks. They are working on generic circuits, so using CIRCOM, and being able to prove, for example, that two addresses can be related, but without revealing how they are related. So that's one interesting way to create a KYC which doesn't reveal additional information about the user when you process it. And so I would say it's an opportunity for us to push for more privacy preserving protocols, even if that seems a bit contradictory.
Something interesting you were mentioning as well was the ability for the Ledger wallet to construct the ZK proofs and things like that. And you're able to do some of them, like you mentioned Monero and a few others. Maybe this is also, I'd like to open up for the rest. What are your experiences like working with wallets and integrating the construction of proofs and things, and how would you like to see things develop in the future? It's an open question for everyone.
So we haven't, actually tried to implement it yet. But our plan is not actually to do any kind of proving on the hardware device. Instead, you only use the hardware device for doing authorization. And exactly as was mentioned, like you want to separate away the privacy layer from the authorization layer. But now you have this pretty severe challenge, which is like, as a signer, it's not enough to just like have a device that does a signing, right? Because it actually matters like what you're signing. You want to know what you're actually authorizing. And so if you have this kind of like private system where the kind of final transaction doesn't reveal any information about what it does, you need to have a different story about what does it mean to do authorization, right? Because whatever entity is authorizing the transaction needs to actually know what the content is that it's going to authorize. For us, we have this concept of like a transaction plan, which is a kind of, before you create the transaction, you make a plain text transaction plan, and from that you can derive the data that's eventually going to be signed without having to do all the expensive proving or whatever, but you could like, see all the details. Other systems, something similar is possible.
So it's basically user experience issues we're getting into.
Yeah, actually, I would maybe tie that back to a point that Chris made earlier about Signal and the sort of like UX and the cryptography. I think one of the things that makes building genuinely private software really hard is that, even now, you need to have like a team of cryptographers who are designing your like business logic, and that sucks. But it's important because the cryptography is what is like the user experience. Like user experience is not about like how are the buttons arranged, right? It's the whole experience of using the product, and if the product has some cryptographic element to it, you have to align the guarantees that the cryptography provides with the user's like model of what they're doing. And with Signal, right, the double ratchet is this like cryptographic design that is intended to align the underlying cryptography with the actual semantics of like asynchronous messaging. And if you don't have that kind of vertical integration between like what is the user's expectation of how this thing operates and what are the actual properties of the cryptographic constructions, that mismatch is going to cause like a world of pain down the line.
Anyone else?
I would just add that I am very happy as a wallet developer when I see that the protocol is taking care of that kind of complexity and thinking that, the signing part and the signing part need to have additional information because it means less work for us. So it's quite good.
Yeah, I mean, similar to it sounds like what you're talking about. We're not planning on doing any zero knowledge proving on the Ledger device. We were also had some chats with folks from Ledger, and they said they just kind of laughed. But I hope that like in the future things like this may be possible. Enabled by hardware acceleration. The reason like your TLS connections are fast is that chip manufacturers have put hardware accelerators in for the requisite cryptography, and it's completely reasonable to expect that this will happen for some ZKPs within a few years. Just because it's already been said, I kind of want to take a different tack on this question of privacy in wallets. I think right now, we have like privacy from the perspective of the Ledger name. Man, it's so hard because Ledger is like the ledger, and it's also the ledger, and they're not the same ledger.
It was a time where all the companies were called block something or coin something, so we decided to do something different, which is even worse. Sorry.
Okay, so the blockchain, right? We can get privacy to the observers of the blockchain, and we can kind of figure out this with some vertical integration of cryptography. We can figure out this UX. But right now, if you use Kepler or you use MetaMask, you are not using Web3. You're using like Infura's database server. There is like zero guarantee that the data you see and the data, that you sign on the ledger generally corresponds to the data that you see, especially if we're doing this, like you view it in MetaMask and then you sign it on the ledger, and that may refer to like contract addresses and stuff on chain. And even if you're authorizing that on a secure hardware device, that data that you just fetched about the blockchain state
You're still leaking.
well, not only are you leaking it, but it in fact has no necessary correspondence to the blockchain state. It's whatever Infura's servers decide to serve you. So it's just like a trusted party. And in this case, it's clearly users want like programmable indexing. They want to be able to get some computed state from the blockchain, which is not the thing that is actually replicated because it's way too expensive to replicate. It's like many, many indices in SQL, right? And I think in order to bridge this UX privacy gap, we really need some kind of like intermediate proof system where indexers can read the blockchain, prove that they have read the blockchain, do a lot of computation because they're going to be doing computation. We're never going to get rid of that, and make some proof that the computation they did was like the thing that the user expected. And this has to be like integrated into the application programming framework. I mean, this is not trivial, right? It will take a long time. But I think, that's one link right now in this user privacy and sort of verifiability stack that is quite weak and will require like many years of concerted effort and standardization.
I think with our time left, I'd like to open up to questions. Is anyone? Oh, okay.
I just want to start by saying thanks for the time. This is clearly an extremely thoughtful group who's spent years thinking about privacy, and it's been, I think, very helpful. My name is Carl. I'm a partner at Six Man Ventures, an early stage Web3 fund. In talking to a lot of protocols, we see a lot of protocols that are interested in privacy, but it hasn't really bubbled up to be the top of their priority list, as in like the number one next feature I need to integrate. And I'm curious, like, what, in your view, which use case do we think is going to first reach escape velocity for privacy? Is it going to be something DeFi and trading related, perhaps peer-to-peer payments, some sort of identity and social primitive? Like, I'm curious, like, where you think we're really going to start to see escape velocity, where privacy or shielding becomes more normalized than it is today?
Yeah, maybe a quick take on that. It's interesting because I remember 4 years ago I was in Israel and talking to Eli Ben Sasso, so the inventors of Stark, and I was wondering like, what is the roadmap, for what he was building? And so to me at that time I was very focused on privacy, and I was quite surprised because he was like, yeah, that's great for privacy, but actually we are going to focus only on scalability. It's like, So is it a bad news? Actually, no, because the thing is, if you ask in this room who cares about privacy enough to pay for it, actually, let me ask you a question. Do you care enough about your privacy to, for example, sacrifice user experience or pay more expensive services that you're using right now just to get that? Yeah. So that's the thing, is at the end of the day, what's driving research and innovation forward is also the money. So if they don't see a direct business model for it, nobody's going to spend funds to develop it. So that's why I really liked what you said about maybe from other sectors that are revenue generating, maybe we can have more funding poured into research that we can then leverage in terms of result to be used in other categories. So that's sort of the way that we hack it now, but I don't think anything is going to happen until we reach the cultural shift that we need, because cryptography has been around for many years. Crypto, like blockchain, Web3 is making it more sexy. Now we see a lot of people working on cryptographic primitives. Most of them have been, invented and conceptualized like decades ago. And it's only because, there are tokens, there is just money in it, and so now it's become attractive. And so I do not think that we are going to be able to introduce privacy by design everywhere. Most people think that it's an afterthought for most projects, as you mentioned. It's like the next thing on the roadmap. If we remain in that state, people have to demand it. People have to say, between two applications, I'm going to select the one that has privacy by design, and then the people building them are going to re-question themselves, maybe.
Yeah, I would say, I think the costs are different costs, right? They're not all the same costs. And I think people are, right now, maybe much more willing to pay some sort of slight monetary cost for privacy than they are to pay like really bad UX cost for privacy. Because especially if the cryptography and the sort of UX are misaligned, and you just can't figure out how to use a system that is private, or figure out how to use it privately. That's pretty like difficult to accept as a user. Like, you will go use something else. But at the same time, people hate, like, if I leave this room and go talk to sort of random friends, like at a club in Berlin or something, people absolutely hate big tech. Right? They know that the companies are screwing them over. They know that like their data is being sent around and sold. They know that it's a scam and fueled by advertising. They don't know exactly why, or like which are the mechanisms, of course, nor do I. But I think the general cultural background is there to affect a shift, and things just need to reach this like precipice of, like Signal I think has already in some sense, this precipice of sufficiently good UX and sort of sufficient ease of onboarding and sufficient alignment between the cryptography and the semantics of user interactions that they can start to be adopted. And still, you see like first privacy is going to be used by use cases for which it is not a feature, for which it's part of the thing which you are doing. And sending payments or certain kinds of DeFi can be something like this. Playing incomplete information games can be something like this. If you're a journalist or a dissident, or you're sort of living, and many of us are getting ever closer to living under authoritarian regimes, then this starts to become less of a like feature and more of an essential requirement.
And maybe I would say one problem also is that it's pretty difficult to evaluate good privacy. I mean, until you have people in jail, or you have other bad things happening. So today, for example, if you look at Signal and WhatsApp, they might look very similar, I mean, from a protocol point of view, but there is one which will try to, run some additional computing on the client, I would say, to be polite about it. So it's quite hard for the user to know what really good privacy is, and I think it doesn't help also to push those technologies forward.
Anyone else? Questions? No? Okay. Well, I think just kind of sum up a little bit of what was just being said here, and our experience at Akord as well, talking to people about privacy. Digital data, the digital domain, those kinds of things are a hit and miss in terms of relatability for average people. And so, like, trying to promote privacy as something that can be comprehended, like saying something like, would you want the government to know when you enter and leave your apartment? Would you like a back-end developer to know what's in your refrigerator? Would you like some pervert to know when you're home because they're looking at your electricity bill and know when you come home and not, or on vacation, and try to find you in your bathroom? I mean, there's all these different common sense things that we apply to our apartment that we can also apply to our private data online. And so, like, trying to break down these walls and trying to be a catalyst for the collective conscious, I think, is a really important thing. So I think we're about right on time. So, all right, well, I want to thank the panelists and thank everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.